They wake to a quiet room, though the world outside is not silent. There is a small ache that moves through them, soft but persistent, like a shadow brushing along the edge of a candle flame. It is not sharp or urgent, yet it is there, a weight that settles gently on the chest. Sometimes they do not speak of it, because words feel clumsy, too heavy to carry such delicate unease. And so, the feeling sits quietly beside them, almost like a companion that does not demand attention, yet does not leave either. It is strange, this emptiness. It is not the absence of life, nor the absence of people, but something subtler. It is the feeling that no one truly notices the small spaces within them, the little corners where dreams flicker faintly but are easily overlooked. They move through the day, and yet remain unseen in ways that are neither cruel nor loud. The world is full of sound, full of motion, but the spaces between those sounds are where they feel most aware of themselves and most alone. How curious it is, they think, that silence can feel so heavy, yet so intimate at the same time. They watch themselves from a distance in moments of quiet observation, as if studying a reflection that cannot speak. How often they wish they could tell someone about the soft ache, the constant low hum of unease, but who would hear it? Who would understand the rhythm of a heart that is quietly bruised by life's small, unspoken weights? There is a longing here, subtle and patient, for something that cannot be demanded, a longing for space to exist without disturbance, without judgment, without interruption. It is in these moments that they notice the little things most clearly. The gentle slope of the morning light, how it touches the floor in a way that is fleeting yet certain, the sound of air shifting softly through leaves, carrying no message, only presence. Even these small, ordinary things hold a quietness that feels like home, a balm to the restless parts of them that have not yet found a place to rest. They breathe slowly, almost as if learning the act again, and feel the weight in the chest ebb just slightly, replaced by something that is almost a question rather than an answer. They wonder if others feel this too, the gentle pull of emptiness that is neither sorrow nor joy, but something that sits between the two. It is not pain exactly, and it is not relief. It is more like noticing the shape of a shadow in the corner of a room and realizing that it has been there all along, waiting for someone to simply see it. And in seeing it, perhaps it becomes lighter, or perhaps it simply is. And that is enough. How strange it is to feel so much and yet so little at the same time. Sometimes they speak to no one but to themselves softly, without expectation of reply. "This is here," they whisper. "I am here." And in the quiet affirmation they notice the small flicker of something like understanding. The emptiness is still there, but it is no longer quite as heavy. There is room for thought, room for reflection, room for the slow turning of the mind around questions that have no immediate answers. Perhaps this is the first lesson of silence, they think, that in stillness, even the smallest things take shape, even the softest ache can be acknowledged without fear. They move slowly through the morning, through the hours, carrying this quiet awareness like a small stone in the hand. It is not meant to be thrown, nor displayed, nor hidden. It simply is, and they feel in a way that is hard to name that even this small recognition is a kind of strength. It is a way of holding oneself gently, a way of noticing life without being swept away by it. And sometimes, in the softest moments before the day begins in earnest, they close their eyes and simply listen. There is no rush, no demand, only the subtle rhythm of the heart, the faint sigh of breath, the quiet hum of existence. The emptiness is still there, as it always has been, but now it feels less like a burden and more like a companion that knows them, quietly, without question. And in that quiet company there is a sense of being present, fully and softly, in a world that often forgets to pause. How long will this feeling last? They do not know, perhaps forever, perhaps only until the next soft moment of recognition. But in this time, in this stillness, they discover that even emptiness has a voice, and even silence can speak, if only one listens carefully enough. They speak, and their words drift into the air as if carried by the wind, only to fall softly to the ground, unheard, unreceived. It is not that the world is cruel, but that it is indifferent in the way that leaves them feeling small, almost invisible. How strange it is, they think, that words can leave the mouth so certain yet land so empty. And in that emptiness, a quiet ache gathers, settling around the heart like a gentle shadow. Sometimes they repeat themselves softly, hoping that someone will listen, hoping that someone might understand the weight behind their voice. And yet each time the words come back altered, reshaped by others' perceptions, twisted in ways that feel unfamiliar, almost untrue. How can a thought so clear inside become so unrecognizable outside? They wonder quietly, as if asking the room itself. There are moments when a single word from someone else lingers far longer than it should, like a stone placed upon a fragile branch. They notice how easily people react, how quickly meanings are assumed, how quickly judgments are made. And they feel the gentle pull of frustration rising inside, soft but persistent, a quiet tugging at the edges of patience. Yet they remain still, watching, feeling, listening. They notice the small betrayals of misunderstanding, the subtle shifts in tone that signal disconnection. It's never loud or violent, but the quiet twisting of intention, the gentle reshaping of meaning is enough to prick the spirit. It is like standing beside a calm river and watching ripples form from stones they did not throw. The water moves, but the disturbance travels far, touching corners of the soul they did not know could be touched. And in this quiet observation they begin to see a pattern, not in others exactly, but in themselves. How often they have let words cut deeper than the silence between them. How often they have reacted before the meaning had time to settle. How often they have felt the sting of misunderstanding as if it were a sharp wind, when it was really just a passing shadow moving across the landscape of life. They breathe slowly, feeling the soft pulse of awareness grow, realizing that not all disturbances demand a voice in reply. They reflect on the weight of saying too much, on the subtle power of restraint, on the strange emptiness that comes when one feels unheard. There is a loneliness here, quiet and patient, but it is not without lesson. How curious it is, they think, that the same words that leave one feeling weak can also teach strength, if one listens carefully. That in being misunderstood there is a kind of mirror held up, showing not the world as it is, but the self as it might yet become. Sometimes in the dim light of the evening they recall moments of sharp words, moments when the heart flinched at the tone of another. They feel the echo still, soft as a sigh, soft as the turning of a page, and they notice that these echoes carry not just pain, but attention to how they feel, to the smallness of their own reactions, to the gentle tension between voice and silence. And in noticing, they begin to breathe more slowly, to watch more carefully, to sense the delicate lines between what is theirs to carry and what is not. It is in this careful watching that they begin to understand the strange alchemy of speech and silence. Words can wound, yes, but they can also vanish harmlessly if met with stillness. Words can twist, yes, but the twisting only matters if the heart bends with them. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, they learn that the world will rarely shape itself to match their intention, that people will hear or not hear, and that neither outcome diminishes the quiet power that resides within. They pause in the long hours when the world is soft and still, thinking of all the things said, all the things misunderstood. They feel the gentle weight of these moments, and they let it rest without trying to fix it. There is a subtle courage in holding the heart steady, in allowing misunderstanding to drift past without dragging the self into its current. They wonder quietly, almost in awe, how often silence rather than speech might hold more truth. And as night settles in, they notice a calm spreading, delicate and patient, like the slow turning of a page. The sting of words is still there, but IT no longer tugs so insistently at the edges of thought. They breathe in the quiet, breathe out the ache, and feel the soft pulse of something enduring inside. They understand slowly that being heard is not always the gift of others, but the gift of oneself. That in the stillness between words, a kind of clarity waits, and in that clarity the heart can rest. They close their eyes and listen to the silence around them, feeling the gentle ebb of tension, the slow settling of disturbance, and the quiet truth that sometimes the most profound understanding comes not from being heard, but from simply existing, patient, soft, and unshaken. They watch quietly from the edge of things. The world moves around them, full of gestures and words, full of small motions that seem so certain in their meaning. And yet, there is a subtle dissonance they notice, a gap between what is shown and what is felt. How often people move as though pulled by wind, never stopping to notice the quiet that lies beneath their steps. They wonder, softly, if anyone else sees it, if anyone else feels it, or if it is theirs alone to witness. There is a curious weight in watching, not of judgment, but of deep attention. They notice how easily anger flares in the small spaces between words, how quickly irritation spreads like mist over a still pond. And in observing this, they feel a gentle tension arise within themselves, a pull toward reaction that they do not follow. The heart knows the instinct, the mind K. Now's the cost. And so they remain still, like a tree rooted firmly while the wind bends everything around it. Sometimes they feel unseen, though they are watching so carefully. Their quiet presence goes unnoticed, their patience unremarked. And yet, there is a strange comfort in this. If the world does not acknowledge them, at least it does not disturb them. If the world moves in haste and clamor, at least they move slowly, feeling the rhythm of their own thoughts, unbroken by the noise outside. How gentle it feels to notice the rush without becoming part of it, to observe the storm without letting it shake the heart. They begin to see patterns, soft and subtle, in the ways others speak and act. Not to judge, not to label, but to understand the currents of human behavior. How often people react before they think, how often they speak before they see, and they notice the effect of this on themselves. The quiet pull to respond, the small tension in the chest that tells them the world expects engagement. Yet they breathe slowly, letting the pull pass through them like a leaf drifting on water. It is a strange kind of loneliness, this act of watching without joining, feeling without speaking. And yet, there is wisdom in it, subtle and patient, like the turning of soil before a seed sprouts. They begin to notice their own heartbeat in these quiet observations, the soft rise and fall of breath, the steady rhythm that continues even as the world hurries past. And they feel a general pride, not in being seen, but in being steady, in being quiet, in being present even when it seems unnoticed. There are moments when they catch a flicker of understanding in another, a glance that mirrors their own quiet patience. And in those moments they feel a soft connection, brief but profound, like light breaking through a thin layer of clouds. How rare it is, they think, for one to notice another without expectation, without demand. And yet, it happens sometimes, in the smallest of gestures, in the softest of looks, and it leaves a lingering warmth that does not fade quickly. They also notice the ways in which others' reactions ripple outward, touching people and places in ways that seem almost inevitable. A word spoken in haste, a glance full of irritation, a sigh unnoticed. It all travels, softly, quietly, shaping the spaces around it. And they wonder, with gentle curiosity, how much of life is moved by these small forces, how much by the choices to speak or to remain silent. And they feel the delicate balance within themselves, the choice to observe without disturbance, to hold the calm even as the world tilts around them. In the still hours when shadows stretch long across the floor, they reflect on the lessons in watching. They see the subtle strength in patience, the quiet power in restraint, the soft wisdom that comes from noticing without reacting. And they feel the small stirring of understanding that perhaps it is not the world that must change, but the self that must find steadiness amid motion. There is a quiet joy in this, gentle and unassuming, like the slow unfurling of a flower in the shade. They breathe deeply, slowly, letting their chest rise and fall in time with the soft rhythm of their own being. And they feel the world move around them, still fast, still restless, still impatient, but no longer pressing upon the heart. They have watched, quietly, and in the watching they have begun to understand something vital, that the true measure of strength is not in reacting, but in the patient holding of one's own center, the calm presence that observes without haste, without need, without expectation. And as night gathers its quiet shadows, they feel a soft peace settling over them. The world continues its motion, the currents of reaction and noise still swirling beyond their reach, and yet within themselves there is stillness. A gentle, steady stillness that comes from watching, from breathing, from quietly being, and from understanding that some of the most profound strength is hidden, quiet, and unshaken. They pause, and in that pause they notice the small gap between thought and action, between impulse and response. It is a quiet space, almost invisible, yet it holds more than they had imagined. How often they had rushed before, letting words slip too quickly, letting feelings push the body into motion without thought. And now, in the stillness, they see that there is another way, a way that begins simply by noticing the moment before it moves. It is not a grand revelation, not a sudden light in the sky, but a quiet unfolding, like the soft opening of a flower in the shade. They feel the first hint of power in restraint, the gentle strength in holding the breath, in allowing the chest to rise and fall without reaction. How strange it feels that simply waiting, simply observing, can shift the weight of the heart so profoundly. They notice their thoughts as they come, like clouds passing slowly across a pale sky. Some are dark and heavy, others light and fleeting, but none demand immediate attention. And in this quiet observation, they begin to recognize the patterns that had gone unnoticed before, the ways the heart tenses at a look, a word, a gesture, the ways the mind leaps before the body, the ways they had been carried by the currents of impulse without knowing. In this pause, they find a subtle freedom. They are not pulled by the outer world, not tossed by the tides of reaction. They can see the flow without being swept into it. How gentle this freedom feels, like the soft ripple of water that moves without resistance, or the slow bending of a tree that does not fight the wind. And they realize that the moment of stillness is not empty, but full of choice, full of presence, full of quiet strength that had been waiting all along. They wonder why it had taken so long to notice, why they had believed that action must always follow thought, that feeling must always find expression. And yet there is no regret here, only understanding, a soft recognition that life has many rhythms, and some of the most profound ones are measured not in movement, but in the careful holding of oneself. Sometimes they let the moment stretch longer than usual, feeling the gentle pulse of breath, the quiet rising and falling of the chest, the slow hum of existence that carries on even when the mind is still. And in these moments they sense the difference between reacting and responding, between being carried by impulse and moving with intention. How delicate this difference is, almost invisible, and yet how much it shapes the world within them. They notice the faint stirrings of impatience that arise, as if the body itself protests the stillness. And they allow it to be, soft as a passing breeze, not pushing it away, not holding it too tightly. It is enough to watch, to feel, to breathe, to notice. And in noticing, they find that the heart begins to quiet, that the small tensions in the chest dissolve, that the mind, which had once been a restless river, now moves like a pond touched only by the gentlest wind. They think quietly of the people and situations that had once provoked sharp reactions, moments that had left the heart bruised or the spirit restless, and they feel the soft unfolding of understanding that the world need not be shaped by their words, that others' actions need not disturb the inner stillness, that a simple pause, a single breath held and transformed the heart from a place of tension to a place of quiet clarity. It is in this simple pause that they discover a kind of listening that is deeper than words. They listen not to respond, not to argue, not to be understood, but to notice, to feel, to perceive the currents of life that pass all around. And in this listening, they begin to understand that there is power in stillness, not the loud power of force or assertion, but the quiet, patient power of someone who knows the weight of their own heart and the depth of their own presence. And as the evening settles softly around them, they continue to breathe slowly, holding the gentle pause within, feeling it as a soft rhythm beneath the chest, beneath the mind, beneath the restless stirrings that had once demanded immediate attention. There is a subtle satisfaction here, quiet and patient, like the turning of soil before a seed grows, like the slow shaping of stone by water. The pause is not empty. It is full of possibility, full of awareness, full of a quiet, enduring strength that will carry them through whatever comes next. And they realize, almost imperceptibly, that in this soft attention, in this gentle noticing of the moment before movement, they have discovered a first lesson of true presence, that the heart, when it waits and watches, begins to understand itself, begins to rest in the quiet, and begins to find a kind of strength that no words, no actions, no disturbances can take away. They look inward, and, in the quiet of their own mind, they begin to see the restless self as it truly is. It is a small, persistent voice, always seeking response, always nudging toward movement, always wanting to prove itself in the face of the world. And yet, when they watch it closely, they notice how much of its energy is spent on small storms, on fleeting irritations, on shadows that vanish as soon as they are observed. How much of the heart's unrest is borrowed from moments that no longer exist, or from words that have long since passed. They feel a gentle tightening in the chest, as they recall the times they allowed this voice to guide them too quickly, to push them into reaction before thought had time to settle. How many words spoken too sharply, how many gestures made too hastily, how many moments lost because the heart moved before it paused. And yet, there is no sorrow here, only quiet recognition, the kind that comes softly, like light filtering through a thin morning mist. They notice the pattern, and they notice themselves, and they feel the first stirrings of a quiet understanding that to respond without pause is not strength, but surrender. They reflect on the small pride that comes from being seen, from being acknowledged, and they realize how often it has guided their actions, like a faint compass pointing always outward. How strange it is, they think, that the need to be noticed can lead the heart away from itself, that the desire for recognition can shake the calmest of ins. And in this realization there is no judgment, only gentle observation, a soft turning inward toward the parts of the self that have been quiet all along, waiting for notice. They notice how easily the mind invents stories, small dramas that pull the heart into reaction. A glance becomes criticism, a word becomes accusation, a silence becomes rejection, and they see the endless motion this creates, the constant ripple of tension that moves through the body and through thought. How often had they allowed these small illusions to control the heart, to direct the breath, to shape the face into lines of unease? And yet, when they breathe slowly, when they pause, when they simply watch without judgment, the illusions begin to soften, and the tension begins to ease. It is in these moments of quiet reflection that they understand the true weight of the restless self. Not in anger, not in despair, not in pride, but in the subtle, almost invisible tug of impulse that whispers, "Do something, speak now, react." And they notice how small acts of awareness, small acts of holding still, begin to weaken this tug, begin to loosen the grip it has had on the heart. How delicate it is, this turning inward. How careful one must be not to force it, but to let it unfold naturally, gently, patiently. They remember the moments when the world seemed heavy, when the words of others pressed too strongly against the chest, when the stirrings of pride and fear rose together in quiet storms. And they feel the difference now, the soft space that is opened within, the gentle pause between thought and movement, the quiet gap where choice exists. How strange, they think, that such a small space can hold so much power, that in stillness, in observation, in patient awareness, the restless self begins to shrink and the calm self begins to grow. They allow themselves to linger there in that soft space, noticing the subtle rise and fall of the chest, the gentle rhythm of the heart, the slow unfolding of breath. They notice the small tension leaving the shoulders, the quiet settling in the mind, the subtle warmth that spreads through the center of the chest. And they realize that restraint is not a cage, but a kind of freedom, that to hold oneself with patience is not weakness, but the first step towards strength that is steady, enduring, and unseen. They wonder quietly how much of life they have experienced through reaction rather than choice, through impulse rather than intention. And they feel the gentle sadness of recognition, not bitter but soft, like the fading of a sunset into twilight. And yet, alongside this sadness, there is hope, soft and patient, like the slow stirring of a flower that knows it will bloom, even in shadow. They feel the beginnings of a different rhythm, one measured not by the world outside, but by the quiet pulse within. In this slow, reflective moment, they begin to understand the first lessons of inner discipline, that the heart, when it observes itself, when it listens to its own quiet stirrings, begins to find balance. That the restless self, if met with patience and calm, begins to lose its grip on fear, on irritation, on the small storms that once ruled the chest. And they feel softly the first gentle hint of a new presence within, one that does not need to speak to be understood, does not need to move to be strong, does not need approval to be whole. And as night settles softly around them, they breathe again, slowly, deeply, letting the calm pulse through every part of the body, through every corner of thought, through every quiet chamber of the heart. The restless self is still there, soft and small, but no longer commanding, no longer urgent, no longer pulling at the edges of being. They rest in the gentle recognition that the first act of true strength is quiet, patient, and aware, the quiet mastery of one's own mind, and the gentle holding of one's own heart. They begin to choose silence, and in that choice they feel something shift within. It is not a loud or sudden change, but a quiet settling, as if a soft hand has lifted the weight from the chest. They notice how often the voice of the restless self had demanded attention, how often it had urged them to speak, to act, to prove themselves in ways that left the heart heavy. And now, with each gentle pause, each moment of stillness, they feel the small relief of stepping aside from that constant push. It is strange how quiet it feels to resist. The instinct to respond. The world seems to move as before, as restless, as pressing, as urgent, yet they remain calm, observing without the need to interfere, listening without the need to answer. How easy it would be to react, how tempting it is to voice the irritation, the misunderstanding, the quiet ache of the heart. And yet, they do not. They breathe instead, letting the moment stretch, letting the small tension ease, letting the impulse dissolve quietly like mist over water. They notice the small power that grows in the spaces between words, the strength in holding the mind steady when the world around it moves with haste. There is a subtle dignity in silence, they realize, one that cannot be taken away, one that does not depend on others' recognition. How curious it is that the same heart which once felt small when unheard now feels expansive when it does not respond. That restraint, soft and deliberate, carries a weight far deeper than any sharp word or hasty action could. They feel the gentle calm rising from this quiet practice. The chest, which had once tightened at the smallest provocation, now rests more softly, more freely. The mind, which had once leapt at every impulse, now watches the currents without being carried by them. And in this they understand the first true lesson of silence, that it is not absence, not emptiness, but a kind of presence, a subtle strength that speaks without sound, a quiet authority that cannot be shaken. Sometimes a glance or a word from others still stirs the edges of the heart, and in those moments they feel the familiar tug of reaction, the old pull towards speaking, defending, proving, and yet now they notice the space between impulse and action, that small gap where choice lives. They breathe softly and allow the impulse to pass, like a cloud drifting over a calm sky. And in that passing they sense the growing power of the quiet self, a strength that moves without force, a light that does not need to shine loudly to be felt. They reflect on the many moments in the past when reaction had seemed necessary, when silence had felt like weakness, when restraint had felt like surrender, and now they see the subtle truth that strength often does not announce itself, that dignity often does not seek attention, that the most lasting power is the kind that grows quietly within, unseen by those who cannot pause to observe it. How soft and strange it feels to discover that choosing silence is not giving in, but standing firm in a way the world cannot shake. They notice how others' restlessness and provocation no longer carry the same weight over them. Words spoken sharply, gestures made in haste, moments of irritation, all these things touch them lightly, like leaves brushing against a branch. They are no longer pulled, no longer twisted, no longer carried into disturbance. There is a gentle joy in this, quiet and patient, like water flowing over stone, like wind shaping sand without ever breaking. And they begin to understand the true gift of restraint, that it protects the heart, honors the self, and allows the mind to remain free. In the stillness of the evening, they feel the subtle pulse of self-respect growing within. It is not loud, it does not demand attention, but it is steady and unshakable. How strange it is, they think, that the same self which once quivered at the smallest shadow now feels rooted, anchored, unbending, not through force, but through careful holding of its own calm. And in this holding, they feel a quiet satisfaction, soft and patient, a gentle confidence that does not boast, but simply is. They reflect on the small acts that led to this moment, the breathing instead of reacting, the watching instead of speaking, the gentle turning inward instead of outward. Each moment of silence has built upon the last. Each choice of restraint has strengthened the quiet center within. And they feel the subtle rhythm of this inner power, like the slow pulse of the earth beneath their feet, like the soft beat of wings unseen in the night. And as the darkness of the night settles softly around them, they breathe once more, slowly, deeply, letting each breath carry the calm into every corner of thought, every curve of the chest, every quiet chamber of the heart. They feel a gentle strength there now, soft, but enduring, patient and steady, a presence that does not need to react to exist, a light that does not need to shine to be. They rest in the quiet were of themselves, aware, still, and quietly whole. They move through the world more quietly now, noticing the currents around them without feeling the need to disturb them, the motions of others, the small irritations, the gentle provocations. They pass like shadows over water, leaving no ripple in the calm pond of the heart. How strange it feels, they think, to see the world so full of motion and yet feel untouched by it, to witness the stirrings of anger or impatience without being drawn into them. They notice how easily others react, how quickly the heart can be carried into disturbance, how often noise takes the place of thought, and they feel the difference in themselves. Their chest rises and falls slowly, their mind turns softly like a gentle stream, and the small urges to defend, to argue, to prove have begun to lose their urgency. How gentle it feels to exist in the space between the world's push and pull, to let motion pass without taking it into the body. Sometimes a word spoken sharply drifts close, or a glance carries quiet judgment, and they feel the old impulse stir faintly. Yet now they watch it carefully, with attention but without action. They notice the rhythm of their own breath, the slow pulse in the chest, the subtle shift of shoulders releasing tension they no longer need to hold. And in this quiet awareness, they begin to see a new kind of power. The power that does not shout, does not push, does not demand attention, but moves calmly through life. Unshaken, unhurried, untouchable by the petty disturbances around it. They reflect on the small storms they had once carried inside, moments when a glance, a word, a sigh had twisted the mind into knots. How quickly they had been swept away, how often the chest had tightened, how easily the heart had been carried from peace into restlessness. And now, observing without reacting, they feel the soft space between action and stillness, the gentle gap where the heart remains its own master, untouched by the world's shifting currents. There is a subtle satisfaction in this quiet presence, a satisfaction that is not loud or demanding, but soft, patient, and enduring. They notice how restraint, practiced again and again, has begun to form a quiet armor around the heart, a shield that does not block warmth or kindness, but protects against disturbance, against unnecessary burden, against the pull of small storms. And in this armor there is freedom, freedom to observe without tension, to feel without reaction, to exist without being carried by the motions of others. They consider the irony that power is often imagined as something loud, something forceful, something demanding recognition. And yet, here in the quiet of their own being, they feel a deeper strength. The world may shout, may push, may seek to provoke, but they move like a tree in the wind, rooted and unshaken, bending gently when necessary and standing firm when it matters. How strange it is, they think, that the most lasting power does not announce itself, but rests quietly in patience, in awareness, in the soft mastery of the self. They notice the ease with which they can now walk alongside disturbances without being disturbed, how the mind turns calmly when tension arises, how the heart no longer leaps into defense. Even in moments when others seem to demand reaction, they feel the steady presence within, the quiet authority that does not need to speak to be felt, and they begin to see that this is a kind of influence that reaches farther than any loud word, any sharp gesture, any attempt to push the world into recognition. There is a subtle rhythm to this life, measured not by the noise of others, but by the slow unfolding of their own calm. They notice how the world continues in its haste, how disturbances ripple outward, yet they are no longer carried along. How gentle it feels to be present without intrusion, to be aware without tension, to exist as a quiet force that shapes nothing and yet shapes everything within. And in these soft hours, as shadows stretch and the air settles into stillness, they feel a quiet satisfaction that does not need acknowledgement, that does not seek reward, that simply is. They breathe slowly, fully, letting the calm move through the chest, the mind, and the heart. They rest in the gentle knowledge that their presence alone, quiet and steady, is enough. that in silence, in stillness, in the patient holding of oneself, the world cannot disturb them, and the heart begins to find its own, enduring strength. And as night drifts softly around them, they feel the slow, steady pulse of inner power, soft but unyielding, gentle but firm, like roots stretching deep into soil unseen. They move quietly, unnoticed, unshaken, and in this quiet movement they understand at last that true strength does not demand attention, it does not push, it does not react. It simply exists, calm and whole, like a quiet harbor in the midst of a restless sea. They begin to see themselves clearly in the quiet moments between thought and breath. The heart, once restless and tossed by every small motion of the world, now feels steady, anchored softly but firmly within. How gentle it is, they think, to simply be, to exist without having to prove, to rest without having to act. There is a subtle understanding that grows in this quiet, that respect, first and foremost, begins with oneself. They notice the small corners of the mind, the soft shadows of doubt, the tiny currents of fear that used to tug at the chest, and they observe them without judgment, allowing each one to pass like a leaf drifting on water. How often had they carried these small burdens, thinking they must act or speak to make them disappear? And yet, now they feel the relief that comes simply from noticing, simply from holding the heart with gentle patience. It is in this calm observation that they begin to understand what it means to honor oneself. Not with noise, not with proof, not with action that demands attention, but with the quiet assurance that comes from knowing one's own presence. How strange, they think, that the world often measures value in outward signs, and yet the deepest measure of worth lies entirely within, unseen, steady, and patient. They feel the soft pulse of this understanding in the chest, a rhythm that is neither loud nor insistent, but persistent, gentle, and enduring. And they notice how the small tensions of life, the subtle irritations, the moments that once pressed heavily upon the mind, no longer shape them. They exist alongside the world without being moved by it, aware but unshaken, responsive only when the heart chooses, and otherwise resting in its own quiet authority. Sometimes they recall the many moments when the restless self had driven them outward, when impulses had pulled the mind and body into unnecessary motion, and they feel the difference now. The soft space that exists before action, the gentle pause that allows the heart to consider before it responds. How much lighter life feels when the world's push does not shake the chest, when the currents of expectation do not bend the mind. They breathe slowly, feeling the calm settle deeper, like water filling a quiet vessel. They notice how easily they now meet disturbance without disturbance of their own. Words that once pricked sharply now pass softly. Gestures that once provoked tension now leave only a faint impression. And in this, they feel the quiet authority of self-respect, a strength that does not shout, does not demand, does not insist, but simply is. How unusual it feels, they think, to be fully present without needing the world to acknowledge it, to move through life without needing the approval or recognition of others. They reflect on the soft power that comes from this calm presence, the subtle influence of someone who is steady, aware, and patient. It does not reach outward with noise or force, but inward, shaping the self, shaping the heart, shaping the mind. And they feel a small joy in this, quiet and unassuming, like the soft turning of pages in a book read slowly, like the gentle unfolding of a flower under the shade. How deep and lasting the lessons of silence, restraint, and inner understanding can be when one allows them to settle fully into the soul. And in these moments, as the shadows lengthen and the air grows still, they rest in the gentle knowledge that the heart has found its own rhythm, that the mind has learned patience, that the self has discovered dignity in quiet presence. There is no need for outward demonstration, no need for clamor or proof. They are enough simply as they are, anchored softly in their own awareness, fully present, fully whole. They feel the pulse of this understanding spread through every part of them, subtle and steady, like roots reaching quiet. Lie into soil, like the slow settling of water in a calm lake. They breathe deeply, letting the calm flow into every corner of thought, every fold of emotion, every quiet chamber of the heart. And in this soft presence, they sense a freedom that is gentle, patient, and enduring. A freedom born not of conquest, not of noise, but of careful attention, quiet choice, and the steady cultivation of inner peace. And as night envelops them, they rest there, softly and completely, aware of their own strength, their own dignity, their own quiet understanding. They do not need to move, they do not need to prove, they do not need to speak. They are steady, they are whole, they are quietly unshakable, at peace with themselves and gently at home in the world as it is.